Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly. All right, here we go. Will Vicent. Will is a proud member of the California Energy Commission where he leads the Building Standards Office. Will is the friendliest and least knowledgeable member of an all-star team who are responsible for maintaining and updating California's energy code, its companion energy compliance software, and outreach and education programs. Will has dedicated his career to reimagining our built environment into one that is more ecologically intelligent and equitably distributed. Danny Tam is a professional engineer specializing in mechanical systems at the California Energy Commission, serving as the water heating technical lead in the Building Energy Efficiency Standards Division, Title 24. Danny has been instrumental in developing individual heat pump water heater code back in 2017, that code, central heat pump water heater code in 2020, the supporting mechanical system decarbonization code measures in the 2022 code cycle, and of course, beginning in 2025. Welcome, Will. Welcome, Danny. Thank you both.
Hey, thanks for that, Sean, and thanks for inviting us. It always sounds a little bit goofy since I've been working with many of you for over a decade. So hopefully we can keep the conversation somewhat informal. But the invitation, Sean, thank you, is very timely. So we have a very substantial update to California's Energy Code coming up in August. And we'll start by giving you a summary introduction, which I'll give, again, the high level stuff. And then Danny Tam will dive into some of the specifics and even provide a live demo of our latest CBEC res. So got some cool stuff for you guys. Okay, let's see if the slides are advancing there. So here's also some sneak peeks for you. Cover the 2022 Energy Code, which again will be coming for proposed adoption on August 11th. California's Energy Code specifically is a consumer protection mechanism. So I think the most important thing to highlight as a benefit of the Energy Code is that it is required by statute to be cost effective and feasible. The standards themselves, the Energy Code and appliances standards together have saved over $100 billion on utility bills for Californians. So this is pretty substantial. I'm sure this audience knows better than I do that energy efficiency and building decarbonization have already been identified by a number of studies, including statewide studies, to be a least cost means to meeting our climate action goals. So this isn't something that is an option. With transportation electrification and cleaning up the grid, building decarbonization is up there with things that we have to do. Notwithstanding, the Standards Energy Code does allow and encourage load flexibility for an increasingly electrical grid. So we want to use more electricity and less fossil fuels for sure. And we find our Energy Code somewhat unique in California in that we provide a lot of compliance flexibility. And many on this call are well aware that we have a prescriptive and a performance path that allows for trade-offs above an energy budget. So the work that I'll be presenting, and Danny, is definitely stemming from the Energy Commission, but we recognize we are part of a much, much larger network of people who support codes and standards work in California. There's a number of agencies in California who contribute to that in one way or another. These are just some of the agencies. And then, of course, our large utility partners help out, and also the regional energy networks, and many others are involved in developing a public process that incrementally advances the code in a way that we feel best represents the state of California. So if you've been wondering what we've been up to for the last 3 years, this has been, without a doubt, the most substantial package the Energy Commission has ever proposed for an update in 2022. The Energy Code resides in Title 24, Part 6 of the Building Standards Code, the California Building Standards Code. So that's Part 6. With it, this code cycle, we are also preparing a full environmental impact report, which assesses the potential environmental impacts of the updates themselves. And then, of course, you may have also heard of CalGreen, which resides in Part 11, which we are also proposing voluntary provisions in, and Danny will talk about that. So we have three major efforts all happening at the same time, and they are culminating at our August 11th business meeting. So the reason I say this invitation to speak is so timely is because I've worked with many of you for many number of years on the call, and I'm asking that if you have the ability to please show up on August 11th and represent your genuine support for the code update if you have the ability to. We could use all the representation that we can to make sure all voices are heard. This will be a particularly important event for us. So some of the highlights of the energy code is we've been talking a lot already about heat pumps for obvious reasons, and I'll glaze past this because you guys all know this, that they're the big trifecta. They increase efficiency, so they make sense in the efficiency standards. They drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and they allow for some level of encouragement with load flexibility. We have heard a number of data points regarding installation of heat pumps in California. The best data that we can pull together of field installations of newly constructed homes indicates that less than 5% of installations are heat pumps. So it's relatively a new technology, even though many of us already know that they're a slam dunk technology. So what we're doing in the standards is all that we can to cost effectively encourage heat pumps as standards. So that means for single family projects, heat pumps are standard for water or space heaters, calling it sort of a heat pump in every home standard. For multi-family projects, heat pump space heating is standard with some very minor exceptions. And then on commercial buildings, heat pumps are standard for space heating and water heating for schools, both of them, and are either space or water heating as standard for offices, banks, libraries, retail, and groceries. So again, we did the best that we could cost effectively to build these in as standards. With, I should be clear, the ability to trade that off if people want to go above and beyond the energy code. So the sort of overall thinking and vision with the standards and supporting heat pumps can be compared to what has happened with residential solar in California. And I love telling this story, although many of you may have heard it more than once, so apologies. So what's really awesome, what happened in California, is that we had a large infusion of public support and policy for solar by the Million Solar Roofs program, Schwarzenegger, and then also a large public amount of subsidies through CSI and SGIP and many other programs that you may have heard about and been involved in, New Home Solar Partnership. And so we've seen the market adoption or installation of solar PV go from next to nothing to skyrocket. And it got to the point where local ordinances started to adopt these residential solar requirements starting in 2016, I believe. Could have been earlier. You guys can correct me. But that happened first. So some local ordinances led the way until in 2019, the energy code found it cost effective to make this a standard for all single family homes. And if you think about the story that's happened here, driving down the cost of rooftop solar, we're hoping to do the same thing with heat pumps, basically copy and paste the playbook. A big piece to this, though, is like Sean keeps saying, that we need to encourage carrots. We need more programs on heat pumps for sure, which is why I'm really glad that I think SCE will be following this presentation, and hopefully they can talk about just some of the programs. I know there are others, because that is essential to moving the market before we can get to a fully decarbonized future. In addition to that, a couple of other themes. A lot of people are really happy that in single family, we are adding electric ready requirements, which means dedicated circuits for space heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying, and also an increased panel size. So a requirement to have more than 225 amps. So that in the future, if homes do choose to install natural gas, then it would be much easier to transition to electric appliances. Multifamily, we've got a big push here. In and this kind of ties in, starting to tie into the equity stuff. So historically, a lot of you guys might be aware that multifamily provisions of the energy code have existed in both low-rise residential and non-residential building codes, which has made it a bit confusing and complicated. We understand that. So for this 2022 update, we have centralized and consolidated all those provisions into one section. So there's now a multifamily section, all story heights for multifamily.
Let me applaud that, because we have to just like acknowledge first Nehemiah Stone, who succeeded after I think at least 20 years of effort. 20 years, something like that. So thank you for doing that on his behalf. On my behalf, I've made many comments how important it was, because they're not houses, and they're, yeah, all sorts of reasons, right? So it's fantastic. I want to make sure that Tom Cabot had a chance to ask his question here, which is, Will, when a building trades off, quote unquote, something by putting in both heat pumps instead of only one heat pump, as the base code proposes, what typical relaxation do they harvest in the trade-off? Is it more windows, or worse windows, or less insulation, or more solar, or like, what do you guys think people are the equivalent trade-offs of doing two heat pumps, the all-electric version?
Well, we have some scenarios set up. Danny actually set them up for this presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we can dive in there.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I would
Danny.
just say most of the time when builders do trade off, they're trading off envelope features most of the time. So more windows, less insulation. That's why it's really important that we be aware of how much trade off there is.
Yeah, you guys set a floor. Like, you didn't want
Right.
even as you're incentivizing electrification, even though, as we learned earlier today, that it was really like the heat pumps was it was like one of the biggest, strongest things we could do to decarbonization, just generally, that in vehicles. It's like, but okay, good on you. I'll let you continue. Thanks, Tom. Oh,
Yeah,
Michael Hicks wanted you guys to hear him say, "Wahoo!" Helps design teams immensely. Yeah. Okay, continue.
Oh yeah, we do plan to unpack some of that a little bit more. So thanks for the question. I don't want to skirt that. So trying to focus on equity, recognizing that we're trying to get more informed of these topics, and that's why, again, I appreciate Dr. Kinslow's presentation. We want to do more there. So I really do mean this, that the standards themselves, we do see them as consumer protections. So they are meant to be benefits to Californians. And we already do life cycle and incremental cost analysis, but we are willing to rethink this if there are some good ideas with regards to equity. We do already collaborate with the Disadvantaged Communities Advisory Group, and also SEHA, which is an environmental justice group. And of course, you may be also aware that our 2022 updates have, from our understanding, the first set of standards that have different kitchen ventilation requirements for natural gas versus electricity. So it doesn't seem like maybe it's something that major, but it is. And we're continuing to do our best with regards to cooking ventilation.
There are a lot of people who are really emotional about that. So I appreciate you getting that done. But I don't think it's
a tough one.
And people's health, like the health of their babies when they're pregnant, all that kind of stuff. It's a big deal. Good job.
And there's always definitely more that we can do. We are trying to work more closely with CARB to see what else we can do in that vein. And then 2025, we will continue to work with these groups, StateCAG and SEHA, and of course we want to be able to revisit any of our processes if we feel like they can serve in a more equitably in a more equitable way. And of course, the sort of hidden elephant in the room is that the standards also cover additions and alterations. So I think we're going to try to bring some focus to those in upcoming codes. So I mentioned earlier that as part of our 2022 update, we have done an environmental impact report for our standards. And even though it has been a lot of work, it has resulted in some really awesome information. We've had a very large team of over 30 here at the Energy Commission preparing our best environmental analysis for this. And here is a summary. So you guys are getting the fruits of a lot of work here, analyzing the statewide impact of the standards. What's really cool here is you see the distribution of the different categories and how big of an impact they are on the statewide emissions for 2022. And these are all savings, of course. So we don't anticipate that the standards will have a negative environmental impact. In fact, we believe that they will have a very big positive environmental impact to this effect of having a 30-year life cycle emissions benefit of over $1 billion and over $10 million of metric tons of CO2. So we will pass it off to Danny.
Oh, but Dan Johnson asked a very pointed question.
Sure.
Did you compare this code against an all-electric code? You know, what is a life cycle? It's because you have a hybrid code still, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, was there a comparison performed against the proposed alternative of an all-electric code, which I recognize you guys don't have the legal authority to implement according to your lawyers, but did you do that analysis?
We didn't, unfortunately. It would have been nice. We considered that as an alternative in our environmental impact report, but the project as legally defined was a comparison of the 2022 update and everything that we've done in comparison to the 2019 energy code. So all of our analysis had to focus on that as the definition of our project. So apologies. I wish we did have that information though.
Thanks, Will. I would just say our software is free to download for anybody, so you can easily do those simulation to see, how much savings you are getting if you do all electric buildings. So anyway, thanks.
Should we submit that as a comment letter? Like if you're suggesting, Danny, that we take the software and we replicate your analysis because you have it published right now, right? And we then submit it as a letter, a comment letter saying this is what the benefits would have been according to your own methodology if you'd done all electric. The thing that your lawyers wouldn't let you analyze, are you saying that we have the capability of getting you back a letter to do that analysis and make the point that the governor should get off the stick?
You can always submit public comments. We can't stop you. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The tools are out there for people who are curious.
Okay.
So I'm Danny Tam. I'm a mechanical engineer in the Title 24 office. There are some major changes proposed for the 2022 update. So just want to give some few highlights. First, we're changing the prescriptive space conditioning equipment type for certain non-res buildings. These will be applicable to single zone system with DX cooling. Here's the summary of the changes. This will also set the baseline for the performance compliance method. So for most of these climate zones, heat pump will be the requirement. In the colder climate zones, such as climate zone 1 and 16, the requirement will be either a dual fuel heat pump or it will stay furnace. This is because through our analysis, they're either determined not to be cost effective or they use more TDV energy than gas. Like Will mentioned earlier, when we develop standards, there are multiple things that we have to juggle. The requirement must be cost effective, saves energy, is technically feasible, and it uses preempted equipment, meaning we cannot require something that's higher than the federal minimum. So with that said, this just sets the performance baseline for these building types. So for climate zone 16, you can still easily comply using a cold climate heat pump rather than using a furnace. Next slide, please. So moving on to multifamily, we're changing the space heating baselines. So for low rise multifamily, for climate zone 1 to 15, the system should be a heat pump. And for climate zone 16, it will stay AC with furnace. Same reason I just described, you can still easily comply using a cold climate heat pump. For high rise, 2 to 15 will be a heat pump, and 1 and 16 will be a dual fuel heat pump. Dual heat pump, if you're not familiar, they are heat pump with a furnace as a backup rather than electric resistance. So they do operate as a heat pump most of the time. So for California, we found that they actually work really well. So next slide. Next slide, Will. Okay. So moving on to single family. So we're changing to the baseline to either heat pump space heater or heat pump water heater. So for climate zone 3, 4, 13, and 14, it's going to be a heat pump space heater. And the rest of the climate zones will be a heat pump water heater. And you can always use performance. And Sean asked me before the meeting what that means in terms of compliance. So next slide. So I just want to give some examples. So on the second column is what's the proposed standard design is going to be. And I gave some examples of what a mixed view compliance path would be. So if you're in the second column, assuming all your envelope stuff, meets the standard, let's say for climate zone 3, if you install a heat pump space heater, then you meet the standards. If you want to stay a furnace and a gas instantaneous water heater, then you're gonna have to do a whole lot more. So for the same climate zone in climate zone 3, you have to do SEER 15, condensing furnace, condensing water heater, compact hot water distribution, and additional solar.
I want to pause there and acknowledge that's a relatively expensive package, and that's a good thing because that's the gas package. Just acknowledging like you've made it, I think, effective to encourage people. Just acknowledge that putting in gas for anything even remotely as efficient as what electric is not cheap and shouldn't be cheap. Good job.
Oh, thank you. So the story is kind of the same for the rest of the climate zones, in particular for the milder climate zones, like 7, 8 to 10. These are really mild, so there's basically little to no space heating. And the standard design is heat pump water heater, meaning if you want to use an instantaneous gas, it's going to be very difficult. You can do a battery. You can do a bunch of stuff. Say for climate zone 9, you have to do all the things that I mentioned, plus a drain water heat recovery. I mentioned before, dual fuel heat pump works pretty well for a climate zone that has a lot of heating load. So I included here. But so you get the idea. So if you change one of your end use to heat pump, it's relatively easy to comply, as assuming you have high performance walls and attics. If you stay gas in both end use, it's gonna be a lot more difficult.
And Kyoko Habino noted here, we have almost 100% of residential clients ask for conversion of their existing garage to an ADU nowadays. This person's in LA. And most owners ask to run new gas lines from, or I think, to the ADU. Does the energy code address ADUs? The code should not allow people to put in new gas hookups to a converted ADU, this person says.
So we made some adjustment for 2022. We added an exception. Caught me off guard, but there is an exception for buildings 1 bedroom or less. You can use an instantaneous electric water heater.
Really?
Yeah, I added that as one of the exceptions.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, really, since we don't have small heat pump water heaters, and this is such an issue, I've dealt with it a bunch. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So we heard a lot of complaints this cycle. Honestly, when we developed the 2019 standard, ADUs wasn't really on our radar. So for this round, there's exception for water heating and for PV. For small PV, I think 1.8, 1.7. If the requirement is below that, then you're exempt from the PV requirement. 1.8. Thank you. So
Remarkable. Good progress.
Do I have next slide, Will? So another big change, huge, that for the first time, likely in the world for a building code, we're requiring PV paired with battery storage for certain non-res building types. So these will be for high-rise multifamily and select non-res buildings such as office, retail, hotel, motel. Next slide. Mazi, our senior mechanical, dubbed this the lean and mean PV battery storage requirement. So the PV system is sized to limit the export to 20% of PV generation without the battery and 10% with battery. So in this configuration, it is estimated that building will self-utilize more than 90% of the PV generations. And we found that this is cost-effective even under a future NEM3 scenario. Next slide. So we know, PV by itself is good and battery storage by itself is good. But when you pair them together, there's really a lot of synergy. And it really brings the maximum benefit and minimize the impact of the building to the grid. And it really also make the building a lot more resilient to wildfire and future PSPS events. And it also bring financial benefit to the owner. It really helps them to do load shifting and avoid those demand charges. Next slide. Okay, just want to give you guys an update on CalGreen Part 11. I think not a lot of people paying attention to this. Just a few modifications. So for jurisdiction that adopted CalGreen, there's something called prerequisite. They have to pick at least one option to be to qualify. So here's some existing options. We for 2022 we're adding some 4 more prerequisites. High performance vertical fenestration, heat pump water heater. This is the J13 heat pump water heater, battery storage, the JA12 battery storage, or you can do both heat pump space and water heating. Next slide. Because of all the big changes happening in Part 6, it was necessary for us to update the EDR targets in Part 11. So one of the big changes currently in 2019, there's two different targets, and we're proposing to have just one single EDR target for both Tier 1 and Tier 2. This is for simplification and make it easier for jurisdiction to adopt Tier 2. Another big change, it's the proposed margin is in EDR1. EDR1 is a new metric that we propose, that we implemented in Part 6. It's a metric that's based in source energy. What's currently in the EDR now is TDV that becomes EDR2. So to comply with Part 6, you have to comply with both EDR1, which is source energy, and EDR2, which is TDV, separately. So because of our goal for this round, which is to really promote high efficiency heat pump technology, we thought it's more appropriate to have CalGreen to be based on EDR1, which is source energy. Next slide. So this is a table, a lot of information. On the second column are the proposed margin for CalGreen. So this is another change that currently CalGreen is an absolute target that you have to meet. So in 2022, this is the margin. So for example, for clamp zone 12, let's say for Part 6, your EDR1 requirement is X. So if you want to meet CalGreen, you need to meet X minus 4.4 to meet CalGreen. So this is margin better than Part 6. So I gave some examples of how all-electric building can comply versus a mixed fuel building can comply. So on the third column, so if you have an electric building, if you do heat pump space heater and heat pump water heater, it's pretty straightforward. You basically complied with CalGreen. For the milder climate zones, again, you have to do slightly more. You might have to do compact distribution, or you can do electric cooktop, for example. So for the mixed fuel column, as a note, when we say mixed fuel here is a minimum efficiency furnace paired with a minimum efficiency tankless water heater. So to meet CalGreen, you really have to do some heroic stuff. Dual fuel heat pump again works pretty well for the colder climate zone, but you probably need to pair that with triple pane windows. And for the rest of the climate zones, probably the easiest you can do is just do a battery. Not saying you cannot, but it's going to be relatively difficult.
And can you just clarify, this is you're saying for tier 1 or tier 2, and these are both optional, like municipally adopted additional CalGreen codes. This is not the baseline CalGreen, or is it?
Yeah, so I should step back. So the EDR rating and CalGreens, those are voluntary targets that if the jurisdiction adopt either tier 1 or tier 2, those are the targets they should be hitting. So yeah, like I said, it's got to be a single target for either tier 1 or tier 2.
Okay. But so the voluntary municipal codes or county codes would, in all cases, push people to do even more electrification and decarbonization. Okay.
That's it for CalGreen. I think I'm gonna do a little demo here. Let me share my screen.
You want to take a pause for questions? I was trying to respond some in the chat. And then
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, but I don't want to get in the way of a good demo.
Up to you, Sean.
Alice Sung asked, whatever happened with the AIA California proposal for a zero code for California, at Mazaria, that crew, Charles Illy, to be either integrated into CalGreen or at least an alternative compliance method. So no zero code, it seems, at least not proposed by the Energy Commission. Do you know how that's proceeding or not proceeding within the CalGreen group?
Yeah. So yeah, we have met with AIA California several times, and we're continuing to. They had a petition to us, which was denied, but it's not necessarily bad. It was denied in so much that they wanted to move the location of the proposal to CBSE. But the point of the matter is the proposal, what they were asking, falls squarely within our authority, and we've committed to working with AIA, Charles and Michael Malinowski and others on taking good or productive parts of that code and incorporating it into either Title 24 or Part 11. So that's underway, and we actually think that, I think at least, that it's helping us build our relationship with AIA to continue to work with them.
Danny, Tam, Ted Tiffany wants to know, what is the timing of the multifamily software release?
I think we will get into that.
Okay. And Danny, this is from Kurt Hurley. Danny, is there still a chance to ask for an energy appliance credit for building time constant, TAU, for example, greater than 10 hours? Not sure what that is, but maybe you do. No? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
No worries.
If you can follow up with an email to us.
Then I think this might be for Will. In the 2022 TDV, what is the cost of COT equivalent in dollars per ton?
I actually don't know the exact dollar value. Do you, Danny? Because I know
it's in the E3 report. Yeah, I just don't know off the top of my head.
Totally okay.
We can follow up with that. It's a dynamic.
Yeah,
it's not a one
it's
number.
definitely publicly available information if you search our docket for the E3 TDV report.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we should take at the moment. Continue on, thank you.
Okay. Will, can you stop sharing? Okay, there you go. Okay, so I have the 2019 CBAC Res beta and the 2022 CBAC Res beta. So just FYI, the 2.0 release is currently planned for the September business meeting. Just want to show some new features that's been added. So J13, demand responsive heat pump water heater is got to be an option in 2.0. So when you go into the heat pump, you pick the NEA rated product. It should already tell you which one are J13 certified. So you just have to pick those. And I just ran this. And so this is standard design building that the only thing I changed is to change to a J13 water heater. As you can see, there's some pretty good size benefit there, compliance credit. And another thing we did, we added a generic near tier 3 heat pump water heater. So currently you pick a model and that shows up on the CF1R and that gets populated to the CF2R, and that pretty much, that's what you're supposed to install. I mean, that works well for some builders, who they really know what they want to install, but for some others, they're not sure. So we added this generic option. So as long as you pick the generic option during the installation part, as long as you install a near tier 3 heat pump water heater, then you're good. It is vary by storage size because that does affect the compliance margin. Let's see. Moving on to the 2022 software. So we just added more choices. There's more, you can choose NEA rated product, or we added the new Ale Smith light commercial 120 gallon that people's been asking for a while. But we did the same thing here. We added some generic compressor choices. So if you have a compressor that you want to use that we haven't incorporated that in the software, you can just pick that and you can comply using the generic. And let's see. Okay. And the Wilcox and this team has been working hard on developing a standard design for central heat pump water heater. Up till now, the standard design is based on a central gas boiler system. But it's in the beta phase. It's got to be in the 2022 software. So we're just starting to do internal testing now, but you can see I ran this, compare it against a central heat pump water heater. And let's see. We just added more choices again for the loop tank. I think initially we only had electric resistance as a choice. Now you have all these different choices you can use for the loop tank. And couple of questions that Sean asked. Noresco is working on the heat pump boiler stuff now. Also, heat recovery chiller. That one is currently just on a scoping phase. We're still working on the configuration. It's going to be a while before we have that ready. For VCHP, Wilcox is working on that right now. And maybe a month from now, we have version L for internal testing.
That's really a big deal, variable capacity heat pumps. What field data are you using to inform the next version?
That's really RJ question. I'm just not the right staff person. I'm kind of
Okay.
I would reach out to RJ. Sorry.
No, totally fine. You lead on domestic hot water, so we'll focus on your area of brilliance. Caillou's son wanted to know about the minimum panel size for multifamily, if it was 225 amps or 100 amps, or do you guys have a minimum panel size in the multifamily per apartment?
Not for multifamily. We kind of left that completely open. So yeah, the electric ready stuff is mostly geared towards single family. There is some electric ready stuff for multifamily when you have gas stove or you have water heater or space heater in the dwelling itself.
Right. Well, though we've seen that you can get that to fit on 100 amps. Like that's you're right at the edge, like 98, that kind of thing on an apartment. But if you just standard 30 amp your water heater, 40 amp stove, etc., it adds up to, and then the apartments themselves are relatively small, so they don't have as much circuits required for plug loads and lights. So what I've seen is that it's right at the edge of a 100 amp panel. And if we do efficiency, it can be 67, 68 amp at 240 volt. Then do you want to continue, Danny?
No.
Okay.
Go ahead. Next question.
Let's see. Lucas Morton, he wrote, VCHP2 is probably CSA XP07 or ASHRAE 205 performance maps. Can you interpret that?
I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that, but Luke, if you reach out to me, we do have staff who can speak that language.
Okay. And Dan Johnson earlier, he was challenging essentially the market readiness of solar plus battery and wanted you guys to respond to, like, is that market ready? Oh, he says, what's the market prevalence of this commercial PV plus battery system currently?
Do you want to go first, Danny?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it is in the early phase, but people are doing it. And I mean, during the development, we had extended conversation with, the battery manufacturers, CalSA. They assure us they can provide products to meet this requirement. I mean, it's going to be effective January 1st of 2023. So there's some time for them to gear up.
And related to that, the thing I'm most excited about as a practical battery solution is vehicle to building, vehicle to grid, back charging, like the Ford F-150 Lightning next year does that. All of VW's vehicles do that next year. Nissan's been doing it since 2011, Mitsubishi since like 2012. That this is a big thing worldwide and is becoming more prevalent in the US as an option, and will certainly in 2023 be a real thing. Do you have any consideration for how mobile batteries versus permanently affixed batteries would play into this? I mean, I realize it's code compliance, so it's supposed to be permanent.
One thing, Danny. So the challenge, the big overarching challenge for us is that there are some appliances like that, and refrigerators and dryers that are not considered permanent fixtures. I mean, they could be taken out or in anytime. So the analysis is much harder for us. But we are trying to get a little bit more creative on how to build in credits for those types of systems. So we're looking at providing workplace charging types of credits. And I know that's not quite what you're asking, but it would hopefully open the door for other things like vehicle to grid, like you're talking about in 2022.
Well, if it's workplace charging credits means that you're putting in electrical charging stations, then it seems like then it's a pretty quick switch out to call them vehicle to building charging stations. That's like Nuvve sells that right now for school buses and such. So that,
yeah, and what I'm talking about would be like in the performance path, just giving you a credit, not necessarily a prescriptive path. But yeah, we are trying to think creatively about how to do that. Sorry, Danny, you were going to add.
Yeah, especially for EV, when builders file the building permit, there's no guarantee the owner's gonna have a EV. So anytime you say compliance credit, you're trading it off for something else. So we have to be really careful about trading off something that may or may not happen for envelope features that's gonna be there for the life of the building. Yeah, I mean, personally, I also have an EV. I'm a little concerned about how that affect battery life. There's some questions that we don't know how to answer yet.
Right. Well, I mean, I know that I'm willing to drive up and down the mountains twice just to get over to the river. So maybe during the summer, 10 times the whole summer, I'd be willing to sell electricity into the grid. But it might be the times it really needs. Maybe it's just for grid resiliency as opposed to anyway. So Ted Tiffany asks, Will, Danny, what is on your wish list for the 2025 standards? So you're just coming through, about to break the finish line on the 2022, and you're about to start the next race. What's on the wish list?
You go first, Danny.
Mm, I would like a drink to take a breather. I mean, this is a big code change. I don't know if people realize we did not plan for this big of a change at the beginning. It sort of just happened. So I don't know. I'm sure there's stuff gonna come up. We probably focus more on multifamily. We almost at the end of the line for single family. So if I have to guess, we'll probably focus more on multifamily and non-res.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Ted says done and done.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to let Danny go first, because I knew we'd have a more realistic, pragmatic suggestion. So first, recognizing that we facilitate literally a public process where we're trying to take everybody's best ideas. That's our primary objective in the process. Now, if I was just a stakeholder and I had my first wish, the single biggest thing I think that we could do was better establish a building asset rating. So that just like vehicles that all have miles per gallon on them, all new buildings will have some sort of rating on them that relate from emissions and operating costs. To me, that's the holy grail, because then now you start to build a market for building decarbonization where people are actually getting paid for saving the planet.
All right. Yeah, people are offering you drinks all over the place. I probably to toast you for your success. Michael Hicks asks, is the battery requirement for, like, say multifamily, it's 4 stories and above, is the battery requirement for peak shaving or for resiliency or both?
It's
You go ahead, Ben. Yeah,
all the above. It's mostly peak shaving, low shifting, and limit the PV export to the grid. With a battery source, it really smooths out the duct curve. The resiliency part, it's kind of like a side benefit, which is real, but yeah, it's mostly we're looking at the impact of the building on the grid.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. As opposed to when the grid's not there.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's based on hopefully you guys are all familiar with time-dependent valuation. So it is based on the time-dependent valuation benefit that it provides, which includes not only time of use, but also environmental impacts and capacity. So it's all tied in.
Okay, now we're getting to, here's Marissa, learner. Good question, because this is our theme today. Take this one, you. What are your wish lists or visions for addressing environmental and social justice in the next code cycle? We just had a fantastic presentation on justice, and that's absolutely, we've been pushing to try to put this in front of our community in this conference itself. So, for example, more robust analysis. And if you don't have that fleshed out, what do you see as the biggest gaps that need to be addressed?
Oh, this one is super dear to my heart. So yeah, for the next code cycle, I would love to crack that nut of environmental justice. And I'm sure it comes no surprise to this audience that we have heard mixed feelings about building decarbonization as an environmental justice and equity benefit. We've had some people say, of course, we need to distribute heat pumps because they are a benefit to people. We have literally had people coming to us saying, how are you building in exceptions to the code as an equitable amenity for people that can't afford to do heat pumps? So depending on how you look at it, it hasn't been a slam dunk from our perspective, but I think what would bring resolution to that is, I mentioned before we do life cycle analysis and also first or construction cost analysis, but our regs or our process haven't historically included bill savings analysis on all of our standards or our package. I would love to have that as a standard where any proposal that we do, any analysis that we do includes first year bill analysis to ensure that whatever regs that are out there are for sure a bill savings wherever they're addressed to.
Oh, that's awesome. Not just societal, but like bring it back to the people who could be most impacted. I see that.
Now, the hard part there you're asking is, what are the gaps, Marissa? The gaps is being able to walk that fine line of what is a prototypical energy bill tariff or rate. And that's in the progress. We need help from the utilities to say, hey, for these building types, these are the rates that would be assumed on an hourly basis. And that would really help us build some assurance in our bill savings analysis. But that's a big lift.
And I think, one of the things that was mentioned earlier was the ventilation standards that you changed in the 2022 code for stoves. And that was specifically to address the disproportionate environmental impact on people in apartments and smaller spaces that have higher ventilation rates. And that I thought was like one of the first times we acknowledged a disproportionate impact of a pollutant on a population based on square footage. But, it has obvious corollaries to income usually. I'm wondering, do you see an opportunity, like the other sources of pollution that we were learning from the Green Umbrella presentation yesterday that the pollution in Cincinnati was hanging in the valleys and it was from the large buildings of the downtown. There are actual smog and the incidents of asthma were coming from buildings that were in like the dense part of town. So you guys have control over like these big buildings pollution, and it has a disproportionate impact on people living in the valleys. Will, I mean, you living in LA, you've gotten to move up or down geographically changes your exposure to air contamination. Do you have a method to address that way of thinking of how the outside air pollution coming from some buildings is disproportionately affecting other people?
Yeah, like again, I think we've got a lot to learn as an agency from the Energy Commission. I mean, in my previous role, I was well aware of CalEnviroscreen. And I think that's a terrific tool for understanding the regional impacts of environmental hazards. Yeah, I'm in the early stages of trying to wrap my head around how we can use an awesome, powerful tool like that to inform or distribute energy code updates that happen. And like I said, it's early days, so I'm happy to hear anybody's thoughts on how we might be able to do that. But there are great tools out there. Just we haven't had the ability to leverage them.
That might be more in the jurisdiction of ARB too.
Right.
I'm not sure how much we can do as an Energy Commission.
Yeah, we're definitely not using that as a cop-out. Like I said, we are really building our relationship with ARB. I'm not sure if any of them are on the call, but we really hope to do much better things as an interagency group rather than just Energy Commission by ourselves.
And you guys now have code authorities. Well, you always did, but you had like 45% of your GHG savings were based upon your oversight of retrofit codes. I think I saw from your slide, Will. There's a lot. So Justine Blanchard, I'll give her the last question. She says, I work with frontline communities and there are many barriers to adoption to new technology due to older housing being behind on upgrades and thus needing to catch up. This usually results in it being cost prohibitive. What might be some solutions you see to overcoming this challenge? So your retrofit code, but what's your...
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a simple answer, but programs, I wish we would get authorized to do a ton building decarbonization programs, in particular retrofit programs, because those need all the help that they could get. Sean and I and others have worked on affordable new construction housing programs to try to tip the scale towards electrification. But I really wish that there was truckfuls of money for retrofit programs. And I know there's some being worked on. So